Hey everyone, this is Mike with TimeMojo.com, and I'm going to be doing a video review of a student of mine who's playing 10 NL Zoom. Okay, so this first hand we have 10-8 offsuit on the button, and in most instances I think fold is the best option here. However, we have a villain who takes 7 seconds to raise pre-flop, and according to our timing tell studies on TimeMojo.com, in our blog section, which I'll post a link in the video description below, we determined that villains who take a long time to raise pre-flop are folding to more 3-bets than usual. So given that piece of information, we also have a really tight player who called very fast behind him, which often means he is never really having like a premium range here. It's usually like a set mining type range, and he's also a 16-12 at 6 max, which is very tight. So this is just an extremely profitable spot to squeeze. We've got multiple factors that say our opponents will fold, and even if they don't, it would be probably this guy who calls, and he's just going to play so straight up post flop. Not to mention he has a 70% fold to C bet over our sample size, so I mean, even if he does call, it's a really profitable in position 3-bet pot to have. So if you feel like you're kind of a tight player, this is a really good way to increase your overall equity in the games and appear more aggressive. Okay, so this next hand covers a really important concept that I really don't see people doing at this stake, and it's a huge mistake to not do in these really obvious spots. So anyway, our hero decides to call here pre-flop, which is totally fine. We're getting amazing odds. I think we only have to win 20% of the time, so why not? So we flop about the best we possibly can, which is great news. But the problem is here, if you are playing this hand passively, you're really going to end up losing the pot on later streets quite often. So we really have to lead here, because if we check and somebody bets, we obviously are calling, and on the turn a higher card is going to come about 40% of the time, and if our villain wants to bet, we're kind of locked into calling again because, oh, they could be bluffing the higher card, or that they could have a draw, etc., etc. So which puts us in an even tougher spot if they decide to 3-barrel. So this can all be avoided if we just take the lead. Oftentimes, this is such a dry board, people are just going to fold, which is really a good result. Or they might call one with an underpair, which you can even get multiple streets of value from. So, unfortunately, our hero checks here. And no surprise, everyone else checks through because it's a multi-way pot and they're all scared. And the guy who raised pre-flop didn't hit it, so he didn't C-bet. Just all bad play from every player in this pot. Really disappointing, but I'm really disappointed that my student didn't lead there, but hopefully after watching this video he learns to. And ironically, the turn is exactly what I said. When an overcard comes, it makes our hand really vulnerable, so don't fall into this trap. Just be a good aggressive player and lead the flop. Okay, so this next hand we have another exciting concept to talk about. So you see our villain 3-bets us here, and we have king 5. Most people just fold here, which is okay, but there's a really good opportunity to 4-bet bluff here. Most people, when they look into 4-bet bluffing, they look at a couple things. They look at what their hand is. Do they have good blockers? They check their opponent's 3-bet percentage, maybe fold to 4-bet percentage, maybe recent dynamics, like did this guy just 3-bet me, is he 3-betting a lot this session, just things like that, which are all good. There's another additional filter that I found has been very powerful, especially at lower stakes, and that is using your opponent's timing as an additional filter when deciding to 4-bet bluff. So again, if you looked at our timing tell studies on TimeMojo.com, we proved that longer 3-bets folded to 4-bets a lot more often than not. So in this instance, our villain takes 15.5 seconds to 3-bet us, which usually means that he's checking out our stats, or he's really not sure if he wants to do it, and maybe he's thinking about his sizing, things like that. So, and if they're really taking a long time to decide if they want to 3-bet you, they're usually pretty weak, because if they have a hand that they usually 3-bet you with, they would have already done it. So this is a really good spot to 4-bet. We also have a king blocker that makes it even stronger. Unfortunately, our hero does not, but keep that in mind in the future. Alright, so this next hand builds on the last hand we just had in regards to 3-bet timing pre-flop. So here we raise ace-jack suited in early position, which is a really good move. And then we get snap 3-bet out of the blinds, which usually means strength. So I think the best play here, unless you have some kind of note on your villain, is to just fold. You can call, but if his range is pretty strong here, you're often going to be dominated post-flop, and your hand's just going to be difficult to play unless we flop big. Or if you think your villain is just really weak in 3-bet pots and you're really strong in 3-bet pots, you could call, but I would just advise to fold here. And our hero actually 4-bet bluffs here, which is just like the worst move, so don't do that. Simultaneously, we get 3-bet here, or squeezed. And I know this is kind of like, well, we have ace-king. What are we really talking about here? The obvious play is to 4-bet. Well, it's really important to point out that this guy did take over 10 seconds to 3-bet here. And if I had a hand like ace-6, I would always be 4-bet bluffing here, because I think it's going to work at a really high percentage of the time. So we 4-bet, which is good. And then you see our 4-bet miserably fails up here, which is just like no surprise. And then here, this guy takes a really long time and 5-bets us. Really small. So again, I know it's obvious we have ace-king, we're shoving, but when somebody takes a really long time, much longer than the 3-bet time, to 5-bet small like this, it's another indication of weakness. So if you decided to 4-bet with a hand like ace-queen or pocket eights or something, or just something that can stack off to like a light 5-bet range, this is a pretty good spot to 6-bet jam. I mean, I think he's folding a large percentage of the time. So we end up shoving, and which is really good, and this guy just snap folds, which is awesome, because we win pretty much half of a stack without seeing a flop. So how many times can you say that throughout your day? So well played. Okay, this is a really important concept, and my student fails to do this multiple times in this video, and it's really irritating. So whenever somebody limps the small blind, their range is almost always really, really weak hands. And what we need to do is raise almost every single time, unless you have some reason to believe they're gonna raise, like 3-bet you back, or be really difficult post-flop. So oftentimes it's from a loose passive player, which means they fold to a lot of c-bets post-flop if they call your raise, or they just fold to your pre-flop raise outright. So this is essentially free money. So by just checking here, you're making this hand really up for grabs. So let's see what happens in the hand after we check. So, I mean, we just totally whiff, and I mean, I guess we can take a stab, but okay, so now what do we do? I mean, there's not much we can do. You could try to raise and just hope he folds, but if we would have just raised pre-flop, we could have c-bet this flop and likely just taken it down. So make sure you learn from this mistake. Okay, so this is going to be our last hand, and it's a pretty cool hand. We end up 3-betting a pretty loose, aggressive, solid looking stats player with ace-6 suited in the big blind, which I think is okay. It's a good hand for 5-bet bluffing, and it plays okay post-flop. So as long as you're willing to do those things, I don't mind a 3-bet here. So we 3-bet, and the villain calls, and we flop a gut shot and over, which is cool. But one thing to realize is it's really obvious here that a hand like ace-queen would want to c-bet this board and possibly multiple streets. So if you're playing a good aggressive villain, you really need to keep this in mind, and I really wouldn't just barrel this through because I think you're going to get called down a lot. So something to keep in mind. So we bet half pot here, and the villain calls, which I think is fine. And then we pick up more equity on the turn. Hero bets half pot here, which I think is really good for a number of reasons. I think the villain will just call again with, I mean, whatever he has, like an overpair, and he may fold something like ace-queen here just because he thinks it's just too likely for you to barrel through, and it's kind of scary for him to call you down. So, by betting half pot, you're also giving yourself good odds with your equity. So we bet half pot, and he calls, not a big shocker, and we pretty much hit the nuts on the river, which is of course nice. One thing I really want to point out is he took 5 seconds to call on the turn, and he also took about 5 seconds to call on the flop. I know this doesn't seem like much, but this is actually a really powerful timing tell that I've learned about people. If somebody calls with the exact same time on the flop as they did on the turn, oftentimes it means that they have the exact same hand strength as they had on the flop. So in this case, that means they oftentimes have an overpair. So at this point, I would expect him to have something between pocket eights and pocket jacks, and maybe even queens plus if he's tricky. So with that being said, I would never bluff this river because I would expect him to call a lot, because this is like a pretty cool board for you to just barrel through with ace king, because it's like kind of scary. A couple draws hit, any 6 makes a straight. So, and not to mention you could have him beat with like queens plus. So anyway, we decide to shove, which is the obvious choice. And another thing I want to point out too is because we half pot the flop and the turn, we have a pot size, well, nearly a pot size river bet, which would be really good if we were going to bluff, because you want to really scare your opponents. So basically we played this hand perfectly and we set ourselves up for success. The villain ends up taking like almost a minute and then calls, which is kind of, yeah, he took 42 seconds to call. So that's good for us, bad for him. And he ended up having pocket tens. So I don't blame him. I don't think it was a bad call. We got lucky, and I think if that river were anything other than an 8, except for maybe an ace, it would be check fold. So, well played. So that's it. If there was one particular concept you guys want to see more videos about, let me know in the comments section. I'll probably be making more videos with this student, so if there's something you guys really like, I could make an entire series just on that. So comments, suggestions, post below as well, and you can always email us at support@timemojo.com. Thanks for watching.